Hey, it's Pastor Tim, the online campus pastor here at Northwest Church, and I am so glad you decided to join us on YouTube today. We have an exciting message for you today, so make sure you are engaged, leaned in, and taking notes. And if you haven't yet, make sure to like and share the video. Also remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can stay up to date with all things happening here on the YouTube channel. Now let's jump into the sermon.
Let's look at Joshua chapter 6 as we continue a collection of standalone sermons. Today, I want to tackle the question, what do you do when you're facing an impossible situation? How many of you have ever been there where you felt like what I am facing is absolutely impossible, meaning I cannot do this alone? Maybe your marriage counselor said a divorce is your best option. Your financial advisor suggests bankruptcy is your only way out. Maybe you've gotten a doctor's report that says, I'm sorry, but we can't do anything else for you. Or your boss looked at you and said, hey, love you, but guess what? We're going in a different direction today. Or as a student, maybe you feel like it's impossible to live out your faith at school, or maybe it's impossible to ever move out away from your parents. You ever thought that? Thought that was funny? I guess not. 8:30, they thought it was hilarious. Thank you very much. As a parent, you feel like it's impossible for your child to get a job and move out. Thank you. You see how this works? I say something funny and you laugh at that, okay? So it's pretty easy. And for some, maybe you have tried everything to resolve a conflict with a friend or a family member, but restoration seems impossible. Again, we have all been there, backs against the wall, between a rock and a hard place. You just think there's no way out. You know what I've learned? It's not if, but when we face an impossible situation, what will be our response? Because if you're living, if you're breathing, if you're a human on this earth, you're going to face impossible situations from time to time. So what will be your response? Will we quit? Will we give up on church? Will we give up on God? Will we respond or react or act in fear? Or will we simply act in faith? In those moments of life, I don't know about you, but it's a reminder to me that I cannot do this alone. And that's what those moments are. You come to these intersections in life where you recognize that you are unable to do this. Meaning if God doesn't get involved, you're not going to make it. How many have ever been at that intersection before? It's like a dead end road. There's no way to turn around. It seems like there's no way to get out of all this. Well, again, it's a reminder that we cannot do life alone. He put us on this earth, left the Holy Spirit to help us in those moments and when we come to those intersections in life. It's a reminder that we need grace and grit that is beyond us. Grace and grit that's beyond us. How many of you ever prayed it's like, God, I'm out of options. Meaning, Lord, if you don't get on an elevator, if you don't come down here right now, this thing is over and I'm not going to make it. The devil's going to win. Ever been there? Well, if you're there right now, when you listen to the words of Jesus in Luke chapter 18 and verse 27, he says, what is impossible for people is possible with God. That word impossible in the Greek is translated as unable, and the word possible is translated as capable. So, again, what we are unable to do, God is capable of doing for us. So it's like God says, you know what? I'm going to put you on this earth. You do everything that you can. You do everything in your power. And then when your power stops is when my power will begin. So there's going to be moments. There's going to be intersections in your life. As a parent, as a spouse, as an employee, as an employer, as a student, there are going to be moments and intersections in your life in which you're going to come to that point and you're going to say out loud, I am unable to do this on my own. And when you get to that point, God steps in and says, what you are unable to do on your own, I am capable of doing for you. Oh, that's encouraging. So I want us to look at an Old Testament story in which the people of God were facing an impossible situation. And then what we're going to learn from that story are some practical truths that we can apply to our own lives when we get to that intersection where it says, dead end, no turnaround. Are you ready for this? Let me give you a little backdrop. The children of Israel had left Egypt. They had survived wandering in the desert for 40 years and even crossing the Jordan River, only to realize that God's promise had to go through a city called Jericho. Let me give you a little freebie. You like free things? Here's one right out of the gate this morning. Oftentimes, God's promise begins with the problem. We think sometimes if we hear from God, then we kind of let our guard down and we think, well, it's going to be smooth sailing ahead. The path is going to be straight. There's going to be no obstacles, no hills in the way. But it's quite the contrary. It's the opposite of that. Oftentimes, God's promise always begins with the problem. That was free, so just no complaints. The city of Jericho was famous in its day for its fortified walls that seemed impossible to get over. In fact, it had been the same fortified cities that had discouraged the first generation of Israelites from taking possession of the promised land. Again, here's another freebie for you. You can either face your wall, your impossible situation now, or you can face it later because it's not going to go away. A lot of people today simply want to ignore their problem. They want to simply hide under the bed and just wish that it will go away. I want you to know you can wish all you want. You can have all the positive thinking all you want, but sooner or later, you're going to have to face that impossible situation. So if not now, then when? If you're not going to get through or over that wall now, then when? Now, let's look at this. These walls, according to historians, were 20 feet thick. Imagine that. 20 feet thick and 25 feet high. The thickness of that, they said that horses and chariots could ride along the top of these walls. This is how tall and how wide these walls were. To the Israelites, it was an impossible situation. To the Israelites, it was an impossible situation. Their path to their promise led through a problem they were unable to solve. So the question they had to face was, do they act in fear as their ancestors did before them, or would they act in faith? Well, let me give you a spoiler alert, just in case you don't know this story. They are obedient to God, the walls come down, and God gives them victory. It's a great story. Go and read it for yourself. But I'm going to give you 3 things that I believe they did. First of all, everything about this story centers around faith. It all comes around faith. And I know what you're already thinking because I've been there. I've been laying down, face down, thinking, how am I going to survive this? And some well-loving, good-meaning cross-follower walks up and says, Joe, all you need is faith. If you just had faith, then you could pick yourself up and you could put a smile on your face and you could just carry on through life and everything is going to be. How many of you have ever been there? That's like when the spirit of slap comes up on you, you know what I'm saying? It's like, have you ever been here before? But in essence, that's what it all is. It comes down to faith. You either believe God or you don't believe God for the impossible. I mean, if you can't do it, what options do we have? If we cannot do it, if we're unable to do it on our own, what options do we have? So it comes down to faith. So I want to give you 3 things today. Number 1, it's in your notes. A faith that believes. A faith that believes. So let's look at Joshua chapter 6. You got your Bible ready? Here we go. If you don't, you can read on the screen. It says, in chapter 6, verse 2, it says, but the Lord said to Joshua, I have given you Jericho. Let's just stop. That's done. That's a done deal. He said, I've given you Jericho, its kings, and all of its J-like warriors. I've given you all of these people. Y'all are not y'all are not laughing at anything today. It says, you and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. 7 priests will walk ahead of the ark, each carrying a ram's horn. And on the 7th day, you are to march around the town 7 times with the priest blowing their horns. Verse 5 says, when you hear the priest give 1 long blast on the ram's horns, have all the people shout as loud as they can. Then the walls of the town will collapse and the people can charge straight into the town. And how many of you, first of all, let's just stop, hit the pause button. How many of you realize it took faith to believe that strategy? There's a little faith required. From a military perspective, this would be considered a very foolish strategy. Now, again, I'm a visual guy, so that's how I learn, it's how I see things. So as I'm working on this, as I'm reading this passage of Scripture, I'm visualizing Joshua. Now, Joshua was the assistant to Moses, and he watched all of those generations, and all that time he was the assistant to Moses, and he would watch Moses face the impossible. But the first thing Moses would do is he would go to the mountain, he'd get alone, he'd get instructions from God, he would come back to the people and say, okay, people, here's what God says. We're going to do this, and God's going to do this. So what did Joshua do? He goes, they're facing the impossible situation. He goes alone. He gets with God. Now think, he's going, all the people are like, man, this is exciting. Joshua's doing just exactly what Moses did, and we're going to be okay. Moses came back with a good news, and we were okay, and Joshua's going to come back, and we're going to be okay. So Joshua, like a good little Joshua, he goes and he prays, and he gets this answer from God, and he comes back to these people. They're waiting, they're anticipating this great profound strategy of how they're going to take the walls of Jericho and win. And Joshua comes back and says, okay, guys, here's what God says. We're going to march around the city once a day for 6 days. 7th day, we're going to march around 7 days. And as we're doing that, we're going to sing some hymns, and when we're done walking and singing, the guys, I believe this, the walls are going to come down, so let's go team. I mean, just visualize that moment with you. I mean, someone had to say, where's Moses? Somebody go get Moses. And could it be the reason that we never see our promise become a reality is because we simply don't have a faith that believes? Do we only believe if we understand it or if it makes sense? How often do we miss out on our promise because God's way is too out of the box for us? And sometimes it's even too simple for us. Or how about this? It can be too weird for us. I mean, God told Noah to build a boat before it ever rained on the earth. That's a little weird. He told Moses, he said, I want you to take your stick. He said, I just want you to take that stick, stick it out, and then the waters are going to part. That's weird. Yeah. Marching around a city singing is weird. Come on, guys. I could come up with a better strategy than that. But it's like, sometimes it's like, God, this is so weird. This is so out of the box. This cannot be you. Joshua, he didn't learn anything from Moses. He's been out in the sun too long. Let's have a business meeting. Let's vote him out. Let's get somebody else in here that knows what they're doing. But I'm reminded of Isaiah. In moments like that, Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 8. Here's what God says. He says, my thoughts are nothing like your thoughts. Now, watch this gap here. You can almost pick up the sarcasm here. He's just like, listen, I created you, but I didn't create you with my ways and my brain. Why would I do that? I don't need another God up here. I just need some people who will follow me. He said, my thoughts are nothing like your thoughts. And he says, and my ways are far beyond anything that you could imagine. We don't even have the capacity, the ability to imagine the level that God thinks on and the power that he has. He says, for just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are just simply higher than your thoughts. So when you're standing face to face with your impossible wall, dare to have faith to believe. Simply have the audacity to take God at his word. Because God had already told Joshua, he said, I have already given you this city. I've given you the kings and all of their warriors on the inside. It's already done. All you have to do is do what I tell you to do. And that's simple, but not easy. Because it's not easy because it requires faith to do what God's called us to do. It calls for faith to be obedient and to do what God has called us to do. So stand up, have the audacity, have faith that believes. So when facing the impossible, when you come to that intersection, dead end, no way out, then again, have faith that believes that God is capable of doing what you are unable to do on your own. That's good. If we stop right now, wouldn't that be good? Don't get your hopes up. Number 2, a faith that obeys. Number 2, a faith that obeys. Let's do some more reading. Joshua chapter 6, let's read verse 7 and verse 8. It says, then he gave orders to the people. So Joshua gets orders from God. Joshua goes to the people. And here's what he says. He says, then he gave orders to the people, march around the town, and the armed men will lead the way in front of the ark of the Lord. Verse 8 says, after Joshua spoke to the people, the 7 priests, when the ram's horn started marching in the presence of the Lord, blowing the horns as they marched, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed behind them. Isn't that incredible? Now watch this. They had to march around the city once a day for 6 days, blowing their trumpets. And there's a verse in here I haven't read, but they were not allowed to speak. How many already know those were not like church people? Come on. Can you imagine? Let's take time out for a minute. You got to visualize this, how incredible this story is. Can you imagine just trying to get your family to march around the city one time without griping or complaining? Are we there yet? Why did we take this way? Are we going to eat? You know what I'm saying? Come on, guys. But watch it. But remember the walls. They were 20 feet thick. The soldiers of Jericho stationed on top, looking down on this army of singers and musicians marching around their city. Now, history says these guys are used to people coming and trying to take their city. So they have seen every strategy, every kind of army imagined to mankind to come take their city. They've seen all of that stuff. And now they're looking down. Somebody had to say, go get captain. I want you to come here and look at these fools. They're marching around. It's the worship team down here. They're marching around the city. This strategy certainly would not have been taught at West Point. But despite this seemingly foolish strategy, watch this, they did exactly what Joshua had instructed them to do. That's the key word. They did exactly what Joshua told them to do. The road that overcomes an impossible situation is paved with a faith that obeys. You see, obedience is a reflection of our faith. Obedience is a reflection of our faith. Here's what James said. He says, what good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but you don't show it in your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith is dead without good works. So there's this great theological debate going on in the New Testament church. And one group over here was saying, you know, it's all about faith. And the other group said, nope, it's all about works. And James comes on and says, no, it's the combination of faith and works. Because in order to have faith, you got to work, right? Faith is what produces work. And if you work, you got to have faith, because what God's going to ask you to be working on, it's going to require a little faith. So it's both. You all with me? So simply faith without works is dead. Don't get mad. James said this. It's not enough to say we believe God and then go live how we want. See, it's one thing to come to church, sing songs about faith, listen to sermons about faith, but then we have to make up our minds, are we going to live what we hear and what we know? An obedient faith is rarely a convenient faith. That's good. I said, an obedient faith is rarely convenient. It's not going to be convenient. It wasn't convenient for these people to do what God was asking them to do. But if we truly believe God, we obey God. We do exactly what He says, even when we don't have the ability to understand it, even when we don't agree with it, or even in our hearts. I've been here before when like my feet's moving, but my faith is still back here. I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. But my point is, it's like we're doing this even though in our hearts we think it's not going to do any good whatsoever. How many have been there? 3 of you. Raise your hands, raise your hands. I'm going to get you guys on board before the day's over. Yes, you've been there. It's like, I'm doing this. It's not doing me any good. It's kind of like a diet. I'm doing it, but it's not doing any good. I'm exercising, but it's not doing me any good. But sooner or later, it's going to show up. Are you with me? I have learned that my feet is what moves my faith sometimes. And it would be great if you had a pastor that lived on like faith level 9 all the time. I just take 5 sometimes. But I don't. And so many times if I wait on my faith, I will never get going. So what I have to do is I have to start going. Even in my going, I'm not always believing. Come on. But again, I'm still saying with what little faith I have, God, the mere fact that I'm moving, the mere fact I'm walking, it says I got a little bit of faith left in you, that I trust you that you're going to do what I'm unable to do on my own. So I want you to think about this. How many of you ever said, God said, do this, and you're like, you start walking down the road, and you're like, Lord, I don't know. You're grumbling. You're not like the people of Israel. This is what I do. How about that? I just leave y'all out of it. I'm walking down the road. I'm like, Lord, this is not going to do any good. Those people are not going to listen to me. They're not going to do this. Not going to do that. Lord, that's just not done. And I'm walking, and I'm like, people are going to be laughing at me. People are going to be, and Lord, I don't see anything going on. I'm doing this, and you said to do this. And Lord, I've been looking at this wall for 4 days, and there's no crack in that wall up there, and they're making fun of me. There's not even a spud or dust up there. But here's what I know. The more I walk, the stronger my faith gets. And every time I walk, even though I'm grumbling and complaining, all of a sudden that grumbling and complaining starts, and I'm like, wait a minute, I've been on this road before. I've been in this spot before. Come on, you know what I'm talking about, guys? I've been here before. And by the way, I remember when I was in this spot and God did exactly what he said he was going to do. And the more I walk and the more I move, the stronger my faith gets. Come on. And it turns into praise like, God, I take you at your word. I trust you, God. I'm unable to do this, but what I'm unable to do, God, you are more than capable of doing on my behalf. So I'm just going to keep moving, Lord. So we cannot stop walking in our faith. You see, we're only responsible for our faith. God is responsible for the results. So the children of Israel, all they had to do was walk. That's it. Walk in faith. That's all that's required on our part. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. I would hope more than two of y'all would know that scripture. But anyway, we'll preach on that one day. It's impossible. But so many times we act and we live our life as if the results were left up to us. Think how crazy that is. The results of something that we are unable to do. How can we be responsible for something that we're not even able to do? That's why God said, you take care of the faith part, and I'll take care of the results part. So I'm capable of doing this. Because you are unable to do this, I'll take care of that. Number 3, I saved the best one for last. I'm going to get y'all going. I'm telling you, this is going to be good. Number 3 is a faith that endures. Oh, this is going to get good. Let's read verses 14 and 15. Y'all still with me? Here we go. Verse 14 says, on the second day, they again, I like that word again, they again marched around the town. Once again, they returned to camp. They followed this pattern, watch this, for 6 days. But on the 7th day, the Israelites got up at dawn, marched around the town as they had done before, Have you ever been there? You're doing what you have done before, but still nothing showing, no tangible evidence. I'll talk about that in a moment. But he says, as they had done before, but this time, come on, somebody say, but this time. But this time they went around the town 7 times. Isn't that good? Now visualize this. They had to get up early in the morning. They had to pack their backpacks. They put some trail mix in there. They got their water. They got it all going on. They march around the cities in the heat and the ridicule of their enemy. They march around the walls once a day for 6 days, just as the Lord had told them. And on the 7th day, they simply marched around 7 times. Now here's what I want to show you. It's one thing to have faith, to believe God, to march around your wall one day. Let me just help you, okay? You're not going to get a star. You're not going to get a ribbon for marching around your wall one day. Because anybody can march around one time. We hear from God, we march around one time. There's another group that says, okay, I did it once, I can do it again. But how many of you know that every trip around that wall, there's going to be a group of people that's going to lose faith, they're going to fade away, and they're going to walk away. You cannot be a part of that group that refuses to stop. Come on, you can't be a part of that group. But they had to get up every day, once a day. They'd get up, they'd march around that city, they'd go back to their camp. They'd get up the next day, and they'd go. I guarantee you, there's some people in camp going, I don't know why we're doing this. We can't talk around the walls, so we're going to talk around this campfire tonight. We got to get something going on here. I'm telling you, we got to go. Somebody's got to go find Moses. Somebody's got to go. We got to get Moses back on the scene here. But I'm telling you, it's one thing to have faith to believe God for one day or one time, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. I want you to think about this. As they're marching around that wall, wouldn't it be great when you're marching around that wall, you would see it like a crack on day 4. It's like, come on, somebody. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, it's like, it's like trying to lose weight and the scale goes north and this out. It's like, what's the use? You just go to McDonald's and eat a Big Mac. It's like, forget it. You know what I'm saying? You go to the gym 3 days, I see nothing. There's nothing. I'm just done. This is overrated. This whole working out things. But that's what it's like. So these children are visualize. They're walking around this city, and you got smart mouths up there, and you're marching around the city, and they're like, no, that was there yesterday. And it's like, I saw something. No, that was just a bird. And then they just keep marching because what? They're looking for something that says what they are doing works. And that's what we do sometimes. As we're walking, as we're living out our faith, we're looking for God to give us a little bit of an answer, a little bit that says, hey, there's a little bit of hope, a little sputter of dust. There's something about to happen. But I'm telling you, it takes some real faith to walk around that wall when there's no crack in that wall, when there's not a sputter of dust on that wall. It takes some real faith to keep going when you see no tangible evidence that what you're doing is working. That's where real faith comes in. That's where a lot of people lose out. That's why a lot of people lose their marriage. They lose out with their kids. They lose out with their job, their finances, their health, and even their spiritual relationship with God. It's because they don't have faith that endures. Listen, let me help you some. You're not going to make it in life without faith that endures. It's okay to start faith, but you got to finish that faith. Come on, somebody. The only way to possess your promise is simply don't give up. A lot of people have faith that believes and obeys for a season, but few have a faith that endures. People today are giving up and they're quitting their spouse, they're quitting their kids, they're quitting their job, they're quitting their church, and some of them are even quitting God. But an enduring faith is patient and it is one that endures to the end. Victory will be ours only if we persevere, if we endure, if we obey God to the end. So here's my message today. Don't give up. Don't quit marching. Come on, guys. Keep marching around that walls, even if there's not a crack or a sputter of dust. Because here's what I know. You can take God at His word. If God says, I have given you this city, He has given you this city. If God has given you this promise, He has given you this promise. So you keep walking and leave the results to God. You've marched around your impossible wall too long to quit now. You know, I'm reminded of Job's story in the Old Testament. The devil took everything from him, his health. He took his wealth, his family, and even his reputation, but he could not take his faith. He's sitting in the streets unclothed. His wife said, why don't you just curse God and die? How's that for some encouragement? Just curse God and die. And it was in that moment of hopelessness, his faith screams the words in Job chapter 1, verse 21 and 22. He says, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise be the name of the Lord. There was nothing tangible going on in his life to give praise, but he said, I'm not giving up on my faith. I'm going to believe God. I'm going to take God at His word. God was with me when I was blessed, and now that I'm not blessed, I still believe He is going to take care of me. And Job had a faith that endured, and the end of his story, God gave him twice as much in return. Why? Because his faith did not give up. Listen, I want you to know the devil is after your soul. He doesn't give a flying rip if you give up at the starting line like you never start. You get 10% into that race, you stop. He doesn't care. If you're halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, how about if you can even see the finish line in your sight? And many people are giving up. And He doesn't care where in this walk of faith that you quit, as long as you quit. And you got to have a made up mind. Before I start, I'm going to finish. I want you to know it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. And there are going to be times that it feels like God is nowhere around. And you got to keep marching around those walls. The Israelites had faith that endured. And on the seventh day, the seventh trip around the walls that seemed impossible by even the military experts, they came crashing down. You could be one day, one trip, one step away from your impossible walls come crashing down. Keep marching, keep moving. Don't stop on day 6. Hear my heart. I want you to feel what I'm saying to you today. Don't quit on day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Don't quit. You come too far. The reason the walls didn't and couldn't fall on day 6 is because in Scripture, the number 6 is considered to be the number of man and also human weakness, human limitation. The reason they fell on day 7 is because the number 7 is the number of God, meaning completeness. You're not getting that. No matter how strong we are, how smart we are, all of us as humans, God's creation, we have a limited capacity, meaning we are incomplete. But where we are incomplete and where our weakness stops, God says, I'm going to pick up and take over from there. Again, going back to Luke, what we are unable to do in our incompleteness, what we are unable to do in our weakness, God is more than capable of doing. He says, I will complete this. And the Israelites, all they had to do was march around the walls, and God says, I will complete this thing. I told you generations ago, this promised land belongs to you, but here's what you have to know. You have to go through a problem to get your promise. I said, you have to go through a problem to get your promise. And all you have to do is don't quit. What they were unable to do on their own in 6 days, God was capable of doing for them on day 7. True? Yes. Now, if God could cause the wall to fall on day 7, could He have caused it to fall on day 1? Sure He could. You just got to look that way. Boom, they're gone. Why? Faith. He wanted to see their faith. And if you truly believe something, you'll put that faith into action. I want you to stand with me this morning, please.
Again, we want to thank you for joining us here on YouTube. And if you've made a decision to follow Christ today, make sure to leave a comment down below or to let us know at northwestchurch.tv. Well, if God has encouraged and strengthened you through this message, make sure to share this video with your friends, and we'll see you next time.